This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so we are going to be learning today the Eloi Nishmas, Wendy Zolomic's mother. The name is Chana Ratza Bat Hirsch Leib, and we thank Wendy and David for sponsoring the Lunch and Learn with Eloi Nishmata in her memory and in her zichus. Okay, so Simchas Torah, Sukkot Simchas Torah, Mashiach. This is a very, very interesting holiday. We'll go through many aspects of it, but as we said, Sukkot actually is bringing us towards. Let me get to share the page. It is getting us towards the end of days, meaning, right, both in the Agadah and in many other writings, Sukkot is closely related to the Zman Mashiach, to the Messianic times. Let's see, right? Sukkot is really the spiritual climax, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and now we reach Sukkot, and then we'll see Hoshana Rabbah, then we'll see Shmini Atzeret, then we'll see Simchas Torah, right? It just keeps going up higher and higher. So the Vilna Gaon, source number 1, writes in Evan Shlema as follows. We'll go right to the English in order to be able to cover what we like to cover today. All the concepts of the month of Tishrei hint to the future. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret. Let's hear. Judgment takes place on Rosh Hashanah. Afterwards, forgiveness of sin is on Yom Kippur, followed by Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, and the joy thereon. So too in the future, the great day of judgment will occur, right? In the future, there'll be the day of judgment of how we've utilized the gifts that have been given to us. Followed by that which has been said, I will sprinkle upon you pure waters and purify you. After death, we have the judgment, and then there is a purification process, and I will forgive whatever is left. That is aligned with Yom Kippur. And afterwards, he writes, on Sukkot will be the 7 canopies, as is known, as the verse says in Yeshayahu, Isaiah, and a sukkah will be shade from the day, the time of our rejoicing. Strangers will stand and shepherd your sheep, right? That is corresponding to this stage that we reach. Afterwards comes Shmini Atzeret, when those who deny the true God will be destroyed, and the people of Israel will rejoice alone and along with those who have accepted God. It'll be a day of completion, Atzeret tiyeh lachem, as the Gemara says. So we go through these different holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and also there's another cycle, of course, that is Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot. So we have these two different cycles, which with both of them culminating when we get to this point of Sukkot. The way it works in terms of the festival cycle is that Pesach is like creation. We were created as a nation, and then we reach the point of the revelation at Har Sinai, that is Shavuot, and then finally we come to the Sukkah, which is this model of Gan Eden, and we start inviting the Ushpizin, the illustrious historical guests, our predecessors, to come and join us. And also we gather the 4 species. We'll deal with all of that. Yes, Janet. Orchim is Hebrew. Ushpizin is an Aramaic term, I believe, for very auspicious guests. Okay, now also on Sukkot, which gives us a good sense of what the holiday is about, we look to the Haftorah. We look to the reading from the Navi, from the prophets, to what we're going to read on Sukkot. And we read from the Navi Zechariah, which is, as you see, source number 2, the prophecy of Armageddon, the war of Gog Umagog. Armageddon comes from Gog Umagog, and we'll soon see from Rabbi Hirsch what is contained in that, and describes the cataclysmic battles that will result in the final redemption Messianic era. Hine, verses 1 to 3, Yom Baal Hashem. There's a day coming for Hashem. V'chulak shalech b'kirbech. The spoils will be divided. V'asafti et kol hagoyim al Yerushalayim l'milchama. All the nations will gather to Jerusalem to wage war. V'yatza Hashem v'nilcham. Then God will go out and wage war, battle. B'goyim ahem. Kiyom hilachamo b'yom krav. As on the day he waged war, the day of battle. And then this should sound familiar through our Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur davening and the conclusion of every Aleinu, Vayah Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz. Ultimately, Hashem will be the king over all the land. Vayom ahu yiyeh Hashem echad ushmo echad. On that day, God will be one. His name will be one. Right, the whole Aleinu paragraph and Al Kain Nikava paragraph. All of that is from our Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur davening. During difficult, treacherous times of our history, those were moved to be included also at the end of each davening in order to give us that strength and that fortitude to deal with all that we had to deal with. And it lets us know, ultimately in the end, Hayashem HaMelech al kol haaretz, v'yomu yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad, v'yashvu ba, they will dwell within her in Jerusalem, v'cherim lo yeh od, there'll be no more destruction, v'yashva Yerushalayim lavetach, Jerusalem shall dwell, shall be settled, lavetach, in a secure manner. Vaya, and it will be, verse 16, v'alu midei shana v'shana sechavot l'melech Hashem tzvakot l'achog et Sukkot. It'll happen that all who will be left from among all the nations that came upon Jerusalem, they will ascend every year to prostrate themselves before the King, God, Master of Legions, and to celebrate the festival of Sukkot. Those are the psukim, the verses that we read as the Haftorah on Sukkot. Let's hear from how this Gog Umagog, how that aligns with Sukkot and the Sukkah and the Gog Umagog Armageddon connection. That's source number 3, where from the Stone Chumash, quoting from Rav Hirsch. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch discusses the interconnection between the war of Gog Umagog and Sukkot. In the name Gog, one recognizes the word Gog. Gog means roof, and thereby at once sees the contrast to Sukkah, the weak, unstable covering of foliage, the schach that goes on top of our Sukkah. Actually, the whole history of mankind consists of this contrast. Is it a roof, or is it a Gog, or is it this flimsy covering? Just as people have the power to make themselves safe and secure against their earthly contemporaries by sturdy walls, so they delude themselves into thinking they can make themselves safe and secure against that which comes from above, against God and his power to direct matters, right? That was the Tower of Babel that they had built to try to insulate themselves from any heavenly intervention. They think they can find security in the protection of their own might, take their fate in their own hands, crown the building of human greatness with gabled roofs, rendering them independent of God. We all know that the way the Titanic was promoted as the ship that even God can't sink it. I guess that didn't go over so well. rendering themselves independent of God. The war of Gog and Magog is the battle of Gog, roof, against Sukkah. The fight of the roof illusion of human greatness, which never allows rest, against the Sukkah truth of cheerful confidence and serenity, which comes of placing one's trust in God's protection. Right? So with that fortified roof, well, you always have to fortify it more. Just look at the California building codes, right? Every 4 years, I think every 4 years, they overhaul all of those codes to require more and more and more and more. Because when it's the Gog, that's going to protect me. There is no end to it, which never allows rest. Whereas the Sukkah truth, where we recognize we make our efforts, but ultimately, as long as we're not putting ourselves into what's called the makom sakana, a place of danger, then we are in God's hands and in God's embrace. Our first explanation of the Gog and Magog based upon Hebrew grammatical rule that the prefix mem expresses the idea of projecting something. For example, or is light. Ma'or, luminary, is a heavenly body which projects light. So too, Gog means roof, and therefore, which, as he explained, is the philosophy that man can insulate himself against the heavenly power of God. Magog is the attempt to project this philosophy to the entire world. And that is what we, the Jewish people, work in order to give a very, very different view of what this is meant to be. So it's the war of Gog and Magog, or the war against Gog and Magog, the war against those who view this world as this God, where we insulate ourselves, we are devoid, not dependent on God, Umagog. And they try to project this theory to everyone, and that is what we fight against, and our fight against that is represented by the Sukkah. The Sukkah being that flimsy roof that puts over our head, recognizing we make our efforts, but ultimately, it's all coming from Hashem. Yes, Dov. Okay, that's a nice idea Dov just shared. Shimshon the last moments of his life, he brought down the roof. He knocked out the pillars and brought down the roof onto the Plishtim. Yes, very nice Dov. Right? The Netziv, number 4, is the idea that in the days to come, the nations of the world will bring their sacrifices, the offerings, to Jerusalem on Sukkot, realizing that even before, when we bring 70 different bulls as sacrifices over the days of Sukkot. That 70 represents the nations of the world, and that is what brought to them this sustenance. They will once again recognize that, and they themselves will be bringing their offerings, the Netziv. In number 4, the bulls offered on Sukkot were for the sake of the nations of the world. And if they would have realized that, instead of destroying the Beit HaMikdash, they would have put their armies around the Beit HaMikdash in order to protect it. And that is why Zechariah wrote in the future, they too will come during the festival to stand by their offerings, right? Every korban is supposed to have its owners standing, the people bringing it, standing by them. On a korban tzibur, a communal sacrifice, so there we have representatives. We have Kohanim, Leviim, and the Ma'amados, it's called, and people of Yisroel who stand there. Well, on Sukkot, they will come and stand there also. That is, they too will recognize God as king, understand that their livelihood depends upon the additional offerings of Sukkot that the Jewish people bring on their behalf. That were they not offered, then they would not receive rainfall. That was the practice in the days of Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, and that is why we would recite Kohelet. He would recite Kohelet during the festival. The wise men of the world would come there, and he would teach them the Kohelet, the vanity of vanities, the futility of futilities, how the earthly pursuits and gatherings are so temporary and not where we should be directing all of our efforts. The last day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot, this year on Friday, is still Chol HaMoed, but it's called Hoshana Rabbah, and it takes on some Yom Tov holiday aspects. The davening in the morning includes the longer Psuke de Zimra verses of song that we say on a Shabbos, as opposed to the more shortened version that we say on a weekday. Also, the Chazan wears a kittel on Hoshana Rabbah, right? And the idea is that we often think the high holidays start with Rosh Hashanah and end with Yom Kippur, but that's not completely true. You might hear some people wishing one another a good kvittel, right? A good note, right? And let's hear, right? On the seventh day of Sukkot, that is when we have this idea that the judgment of Yom Kippur that was signed, it was signed, sealed, but it still needs to be, think of the popular song, delivered, right? And Hoshana Rabbah is when it is delivered. The Zohar, source number 5, writes, B'yoma Shvi'ah Dechav, on the seventh day of the holiday Sukkot, Hu Siyuma, the Dina Da'alma, that is the Siyum, that is the completion of the Din, the judgment on the world, Upitkin Nafkin Mibe Malka, and the rulings, the edicts, literally the petek, the notes, go out from the king's palace, Ugavuran Mit Are, and all the gevura, the power, the judgments are concluded, Umistaimin Bahayoma, and it concludes on that day, Va'arve Nachal Tluyin Bahu, and the brook willows, the willows symbolizing rainfall, are all Tluyin Bahu, are all dependent on that. So that is actually a part, Hoshana Rabbah, this fourth, not this Friday of Erev Sukkot, but the Friday of Chol HaMoed, actually is part of the high holiday cycle that we go through. Now, part of that is we have our lulav and etrog, which we won't have on Shabbos because it's Shabbos, first day Sukkot. We'll have it on Sunday, Yom Tov. We'll have it all the days of Chol HaMoed, including Friday. But in addition to the lulav etrog, we also have our Hoshanot, a bundle of 5 just aravot, just willow branches. And we circle the bima with those. And then we have a custom from the time of the Nevi'im, the prophets, that we take those and we hit them on the ground 5 times. Why is that? So let's once again see Rav Hirsch, source number 6. He writes, the beating of the willow branches symbolizes our rejection of a completely materialistic lifestyle and self-seeking pride. We have physical bodies, we live in a physical world, we have physical needs, and we have to, of course, support that. But that cannot be our sole focus. And he writes very beautifully, source number 6, the 4 species represent different things found in nature to be used for man's benefit. 1, there are things in nature that do not require any finishing touches by man. Sunlight, air, beautiful scents. These are represented by the myrtle, the hadassim, since the sense of smell is the most prominent characteristic. Right? We don't do anything for that sense of smell that is not requiring any finishing touches of humankind. Number 2, things in nature of inherent benefit to humankind but humankind must extract this benefit from them. Sustenance, food, are represented by the palm branch, which of course grows on a date tree. So it's there for our benefit. We must extract that. The etrog falls under both categories, number one and number two. The etrog is food. The etrog also has that fragrance. Category number three, things in nature which depend entirely on humankind for their perfection, upon which man exercises his power as their master, and from which he extracts all the usefulness that is in them by his skill. Nature supplies raw materials, and then man refines them for his own use, like dwelling, clothing, utensils. This is represented by wood, and therefore by the arava, the willow branches, which have no scent or taste. Something that is basically just wood. Thus, the arava symbolizes humankind using our own powers and skills. It represents our conquest of the material world. The Jewish people's ideals can be compromised by overemphasizing material wealth and relying on their efforts alone. Therefore, the prophets instituted the beating of the aravot on Hoshana Rabbah, following the 7 circuits around the altar or the Torah. This symbolizes the rejection of self-seeking pride. It's not all about what we can do, what we can build, what we can accomplish, and the glorification of man's strength. Right? The famous verses that we should not say, Kochi va'otzem yadi, my strength and the strength of my hand, asli et hachayil hazeh, has given me all of this success. The willow reminds us of those realms in which the mastery of man's spirit over things, material, manifests themselves most, those things which nourish pride, and we need to bring that down. There's another message before we get to number 7. There's another Shmini Atzeret. There's another idea about the Aravot. We've gone through a lot of soul searching, trying to improve ourselves, and at times we might feel that we're about to buckle under all of that. We take the Aravot as the very last step, and we bang them on the ground. That's what we've brought ourselves down to. Hopefully we have humbled ourselves, and we're literally down to the ground. But after that, what do we do with the Hoshanas? We throw them. Some of the cousins throw them on top of the ark, but we throw them. We get rid of them. We cast them aside. This shows that this high holidays is coming to an end, right? Hopefully we have resolved to improve ourselves. We've been humbled. At the same time, you can't always focus on the past, right? We have enough challenges of the present. We don't need all that extra weight. So we've done what we can do. And now what do? We put that aside. We discard that. And now we need to move forward with strength and with confidence. And where do we move forward to? We move forward into Shmini Atzeret. Sukkot ends on Friday. It ends on Hoshana Rabbah. In Israel, it absolutely ends on Friday. And Shabbos, the second Shabbos of the Chag, is no longer Sukkot. It is now Shmini Atzeret, a completely different holiday. You don't eat in the Sukkah, right? No lulav etro, completely finished. We in Chutz La'aretz, so we treat every day, is Shabbos the first day or is Sunday the first day? In which case, is the next Shabbos, is that the 8th day or is that the 7th day? So therefore, the custom here in Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel, is on Shmini Atzeret, we do eat in the Sukkah, albeit without a bracha, without making the blessing. We eat in the sukkah because we treat it as a suffix, a doubt. Is it actually the seventh day? In which case it's still Sukkot. We have to eat in the sukkah. But being that it might not be the seventh day, you don't want to make a bracha levatala, a blessing in vain, and therefore we don't make a bracha on that day. Yes, Janet.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yes.
But in Israel, if you liked it, might you be able to have
In Israel, you do not eat in the Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret. Right. If you like it, right, so set up a table on your front lawn and like it and sit over there, but not in the Sukkah. Sukkot is over, and we'll see some important ideas, concepts, the spiritual ideas behind that also. So we go, Sukkot ends, and we begin Shmini Atzeret. In our davening, in our Kiddush, we have been saying Chag HaSukkot Hazeh. Now it's Shmini Chag HaAtzeret Hazeh. Atzeret means gathering in, and we'll understand that soon. Let's go to source number 7, right from Vayikra. V'chamisha sayom l'chodesh hashvi hazeh Chag HaSukkot shivat yamim la'Hashem. The 7th day of the 7th month, that's the 15th day of Tishrei, that is this Shabbat, is the festival of Sukkot, a 7-day period for God. V'yom HaShmini, the 8th day, is no longer Sukkot. Mikra Kodesh Yelachem, it's a sacred calling holiday for you. Atzeret Hi, a time of gathering, a time of assembly. Kol Malacha Lechat Avodah Lo Ta'asu. You can't do any malacha, meaning whereas you can't do any malacha. It's a completely separate day. What is this idea? So just like at a wedding, very often, not all weddings, but at many weddings, after the whole thing with all the guests, they have it's called the mitzvah tans in the Hasidic world, right? There, it's just the immediate family stays behind, stays back, and has a little further celebration, a little more intimate than the 350 guests that most halls on the East Coast say that's the minimum. Right? This is what we charge per person, but the minimum is 350 guests. Right? So do the math and see if it's worth it for you or not. But that's how it works. So after the 300, I'm sorry? Could be. Yeah. Right? So after, but they charge her, well, whatever. Okay. So after the 350, after that, so then the immediate family stays behind. That's what Shmini Atzeret is. After we bought the 13 bulls, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. On the last day, we bring one bull as an offering. This is no longer the nations of the world. This is an intimate after celebration for the immediate intimate family. As the Gemara says, source number 8, the Gemara in Sukkah, Rabbi Lezer Omer, Lezer Hani Shivim Parim, like we mentioned, the 70 bulls that were offered throughout the days, Keneged Mi, corresponding to what? Keneged Shivim Umot. Right? That corresponds to the 70 nations. Par Yechidi, Lama, that single bull offering that's brought on Shmini Atzeret, Keneged Uma Yechida. That is corresponding to that one lone nation, often referred to as the sheep amongst the 70 wolves, that one unique nation, the Jewish people. Mashal Melech Basav Adam, compared to a king. Shamal Avadav, who tells his servants, Asuli Suda Gedola, make for me a great big feast. Liyom Acharon, the last day, Amar Lo Avo, he says to his beloved friend, Asuli Suda Katana, why don't you make me a meal? Kadei she'ehene mimcha, that I may enjoy spending my time with you without all of the hubbub of everyone else all around. Now, this ultimate after party will be in Olam Haba. That's the after party of all that which exists. And just like Sukkot represents the Zman Mashiach, the Gog and Magog we mentioned. Shmini Atzeret, that is the final stage in the history of creation. And that is why we'll see a beautiful Sfas Emes. The Sukkah does not apply, right? And that's why it's important, Janet, that we don't sit in the Sukkah, in our case, on Simchas Torah, right? Simchas Torah is actually the 9th day. So that is clearly not Sukkot, no matter how you're going to make your calculation. And the Sfat Emes writes very beautifully. Life in this world is outwardly focused, and therefore we need protection and a sukkah, which is God's testimony about us that the main focus in our lives is Torah and life in the next world. But Shmini Atzeret, which represents the life of the world to come, does not require the protection and shelter of the sukkah. Shmini Atzeret represents the time that we leave the sukkah. We leave all vestiges of this world and we move up to a completely different realm. We'll see also a little later on. Just one second. Did I include that? Shmini Atzeret itself has no mitzvot to it. There's no sukkah, there's no lulav, there's no etrog, there's no matzah, there's no shofar, right? It's devoid of all that, because that's the point that we take it forward, and that becomes we'll come to that, we'll do it at the end. Okay, after Shmini Atzeret. So in Israel, Shmini Atzeret is Simchat Torah. It's a day of everything. So, example, for this year in Israel, on Shabbos, Shmini Atzeret Simchat Torah, you're going to have Megillat Kohelet. You're going to have Yizkor. You're going to have Hakafot. You're going to have all the aliyot. You've got everything all jammed in. Here, we separate the two. Since we have those 2 days of Yom Tov, therefore we separate the two. As the Ramah writes in Shulchan Aruch, the last day is referred to as Simchat Torah. We make this big feast, Legamara Shel Torah, to celebrate the completion of the Torah. And of course, when we complete, what do we do immediately? Start again. We restart. So we read Zot HaBracha, the final Parsha, and then we go right into starting Bereshit. But the entire Bereshit we'll read the next Shabbos, right? Which gives us a full week to do our Shnayim Mikveh and to prepare our Parsha that week. We also have the custom in these lands to remove all of the Torah scrolls in the Ark and recite songs and praises. We also have the custom to encircle the bima, hakafot, lahakif. Hakaf means to go around. And with the scrolls, all of these customs are out of joy. We also call up many people to the Torah. We also call up all of the children. Even non-bar mitzvah can get an aliyah on this day. And the Mishnah Brura explains on that, the Chafetz Chaim. He says, Yesh litametz b'zel l'rakedel zamer. A person should litametz, exert themselves, l'raked, to dance, l'zamer, and to sing, lichvod ha-Torah, in order to give the cover, the honor to the Torah, as it says, Gavi David Melech like King David, mifazez u'mechaker b'chol oz lifnei Hashem, that he would leap and dance. He was leaping and dancing with all his strength before Hashem. Michal, the daughter of Shaul, called him out on that and said, what a sad day it is for the Jewish people to see their king dancing around, prancing around like a commoner. And he said, I am a commoner in front of the Aron, in front of the Ark of Hashem. And yes, it's a wonderful day when the Jewish people see their king humbling and dancing and rejoicing in front of God. And that's why a king, a melech, has to carry two, has to write two Sifrei Torah, one that he carries with him at all time to recognize who he is before. And David was dancing wildly with joy, with exuberance, with devotion in front of the Aron. And that's also written in the name of Arizal. The Arizal is said to have achieved the highest spiritual levels at the time that he exerted himself with all of his might for the joy of a mitzvah. Even concerning the Vilna Gaon has been written, he would dance before the Torah scrolls with all of his strength. Now, I might have thought that the time to celebrate the Torah would have been Shavuot, right? The anniversary of the day that we received the Torah. Why are we singing and dancing with the Torah scrolls on Shmini Atzeret specifically? Okay. So there are some that give the answer of a parable of a king who's marrying off his daughter, but the condition is no one can see, speak to, encounter the daughter before they marry her. They have to do it on his word that she is a treasure. And a lot of people were a little concerned about that and said, thanks, but no thanks. And then a suitor comes along and marries her, and he's unsure, right? The king said, but no one's ever spoken to her. 6 months later, he makes a big celebration. Now he sees that she's wonderful, she's beautiful inside and out, she's intelligent, she has all of these. Now they got to know her. Now they're able to celebrate. So too, we got the Torah received the Torah on Shavuot with a Naaseh v'Nishma arrangement, right? Accept it, and then I'll tell you what's written inside. The other nations said thanks, but no thanks. We said Naaseh v'Nishma, we'll do it. Now tell us what it's about. We celebrate 6 months later. But in the Sifsei Chaim, which is the sefer that I used for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when I went through the explanation of the davening of Chaim Friedlander, he writes as follows. Source number 12. Yidbar lanu HaKesher. We will explain the connection between Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. Ki ein davar niskav yoter levatei et malchut yom Shmini Atzeret. There is no greater way to express the essence of Shmini Atzeret, which is a day, Yom Shekulo Deveka B'Kadosh Baruch Hu, a day that is completely devoted to cleaving to God. Ela Yidei Simcha B'Torah. What better way to express that than rejoicing with the Torah that God gave to his people? Shenatana Kadosh Baruch Hu la'amo. She'al yada, because it's only through the Torah anu devekim b'matziuto yitbarach that we can cling to Hashem. Right in the Mishkan. So we had many different vessels in the Mishkan. One of them was the Aron, was the ark. We also had a table. We also had a menorah. We also had an altar. On top of the ark, we had the Kruvim, those angel-like figures with their wings reaching out to one another that represent the intimacy, the intimate connection between us and God, the Shir HaShirim, between us and God. And the Beis HaLevi points out, where was that located? On top of the Aron, on top of the ark, to show that the way that we are able to build that intimacy with God is through the Torah. Therefore, if Shmini Atzeret is all about the intimate connection to God, then of course it must be followed by, or coupled with in Israel, or followed by outside of Israel, Simchat Torah, because that is the way that we build this Devekus. Also, we have from Rabbi Kitov in the Sefer HaToda'ah, Book of Our Heritage, number 13, as the sages have stated, from the day the temple was destroyed, God has no presence in his world other than the Dalit Amot Shel Halacha, other than the 4 cubits of Halacha. How could this be? Who took away God's world from him? What does it mean he has no place besides that? Who took it away? Rather, the correct understanding of the statement is that the divine presence only rests in a place where there is joy and not sadness and not destruction. And after the destruction, the entire world was sunk into desolation and diminution. Charav v'shameim. Everything was affected. Even the mitzvot we couldn't do fully with the proper simcha, the proper happiness and rejoicing. The ilu b'Torah. However, when it came to the Torah and those dalid amot shel halacha, the 4 cubits of halacha, that sham lo nagah chorban klal, that the destruction never touched. The shama simcha shlema, and there the joy can and does remain as complete, shlema v'tamah kamo shahaita, as it was lifnei chorban, before the chorban, before the destruction. Lefikach, therefore, if the simcha is there, if the happiness is there, if the sense of connection, of purpose, of meaning is there, then Gam Hashchina Shoresham. Then God's presence also rests there. Usamacha, and it rejoices with Israel on this day of Simchat Torah. Just one last point that I wanted to bring. What, Dov? Yes, yes. So Rav Pinkus writes as follows. On Shmini Atzeret, Simchas Torah, the pasuk says, "Vayita ach sameach." You should be completely joyous. That, he says, is referring to Shmini Atzeret. Why are we completely joy there? Because we don't have any of the props. We don't have all of the objects, right? We no longer have the sukkah. We no longer have the lulav and etrog. What do we have? We have Hashem, and the idea that we can come close to Hashem without. We don't need all those mitzvot. I should say the mitzvot are not the only way to draw close to Hashem, and therefore Shmini Atzeret is what takes us forward into the year. The next day after can be a day of closeness with Hashem. All situations afford their opportunity to connection to Hashem. So we use the mitzvot as a vehicle towards getting closer. We have to realize that every situation that we find ourselves in, the good times, the bad times, the mundane, the holy, everything is meant to be used as this basis of connection. And therefore we go from Shmini Atzeret into what I call the frozen tundra of the Irvine winter. We go into the month of Mar Cheshvan, the bitter Cheshvan, no holidays at all, to recognize that every single moment gives us that opportunity to connect to the Ribono Shel Olam, the Borei Olam, the Master of the world, the Creator, to our Hashem, our loving, caring, involved parent that is there in Shamayim, not in Shamayim, who's here with us every moment. And that's what we take from Shmini Atzeret, and we take that going forward. Okay, my friends. Janet, you haven't spoken up.
What's after Heshbon?
Kislev.
And then
Tevet.
and then Shvat and then Adar.
Correct. Right? So Kislev has Hanukkah, as does Tevet, because Hanukkah spills over. Shvat, Tu B'Shvat, Adar, Nisan, right? Iyar has Pesach Sheni, right? Sivan has Shavuos. Tammuz and Av have those fast days, which will become holidays. Shavasa B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. And Elul is just replete with the preparations and the shofar blowing and all that goes into that. Oh, okay, it has been recorded.
Can we next week? I know it's like
We're not be having lunch and learn next week.
we're not going to get lunch in the sukkah.
Huh? You're welcome to have lunch in the sukkah and you bring along a book to learn from. We're not going to be having our official lunch and learn next week. Huh? So yeah, okay. So we will resume our lunch and learns after Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, etc.